So without further ado, let's get cracking on. So at this stage of the dissertation, most of you will be beginning to read around your chosen topic of research, or beginning to even determine what the precise focus will be of the dissertation. And a really important aspect of that is doing a competent, thorough literature review. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. First and foremost, all knowledge comes from somewhere. No new knowledge exists in a vacuum. And when we're drawing together information from a range of different sources, it's that body of scholarship in which your original research idea sits that will help to contextualize the original contribution that your study will make. So at this point, the emphasis is really on your working with your dissertation's supervisor, talking to him or her about your research focus, beginning to hone in on your, not just your research question, but the specific set of research objectives that will inform your research question. And sometimes it's helpful to conceptualize research objectives as the means that help you to get to the destination of answering your research aim. So your research aim or your overall research question is your ultimate destination, and the set of research objectives that you articulate are the mechanisms that will enable you to answer that overall question. So I've just done a screen share. I'm hoping that you can see that. Okay, is that okay? I'll ask, I can only see a few of you on my Zoom screen here. I'm delivering this on Zoom, by the way, because I'm stranded at the moment. I can't get to Sheffield because of the rail strike. So I'm hoping that this is just as an effective way. Thanks, Joe, for confirming that you can see this. That's really helpful. Thank you. So let's go back to this all-important literature review process. One of the questions that I often get asked as a dissertation supervisor of more years than I care to mention is, how do we know when a literature review is done? What does done look like in a literature review? And I think there's probably a very simple answer to that. And I think the simplest answer is that if you can assure yourself that the literature that you have read is pivotal to your research question and your research objectives in a very tight way, and that you've chosen, key theoretical constructs that will help to answer your research question and that speak to your primary data analysis, then that's when you know when a literature review is done. So often it's very tempting, I think, when we're beginning a dissertation. It can be quite a daunting process because for most of you, this will be the first time that you'll have had a chance to, to show your expertise in the form of a substantial original piece of research. But at the same time, if you break it down into bite-sized chunks, if you work a little every day on your dissertation, and if you engage critically with the literature that underpins your dissertation, the chances are you'll get a really good mark. So I would urge you all to begin to read and to begin to write the literature review as soon as you can. So let's just look at what do we actually mean by a literature review and what I'm planning to cover in this time that I have with you today. The first thing that I want to do is to define what a literature review is, to get a real sense of what it looks like. And I have an exemplar that those students that are doing place memory meeting with me on Thursday will see a hard copy of. It's a literature review that I'm particularly fond of on attachment to place, because I think it's extremely well written, and it's really sets the bar as to what you can use a literature review for, and gives you some very helpful pointers around approach and protocols and so on. So we'll be defining that. And looking at the purpose of a literature review, and as I alluded to earlier, the main purpose of a literature review is to contextualize your individual research question within an existing body of scholarship. There's a saying in the research sort of community: if we steal from one author, it's plagiarism. If we steal from many, it's research, if that makes sense. So if we steal from one author blatantly, it's an act of, conspicuous plagiarism. If we steal from many, i.e. borrow terms of reference and concepts, then that's research. And that's very true, because we're always building on knowledge that our predecessors have provided, and we're always seeking to refine, to come at a research question from a different perspective, and in your case, to use this, really wonderful opportunity that you have as honours students to produce an original piece of work. And if you do take the approach of doing a little bit on your dissertation daily, it'll get you to where you need to be, and you will get a good mark. So we'll be defining literature review, what the purpose is, linking the literature review to the research process in respect of your dissertation specifically. And then I have some pointers on reading to review that I think you'll find helpful. I hope you find helpful, not least because your time is both limited and valuable, and any way that you can kind of shortcut without compromising your access to quality research, I think, in your final year is certainly worth knowing. Okay, so let's look at what a literature review is. And I really like this definition by heart, albeit that it is quite meaty. So I will read it, and then I'm just going to pause for a moment or two, because I would like you to read it too, and maybe just take some notes as we're going through this. So a literature review is the selection of available documents, both published and unpublished, on the topic which contain information, ideas, data, and evidence written from a particular standpoint to fulfill certain aims or express certain views on the nature of the topic and how it is to be investigated, and I've put this bit in bold, and the effective evaluation of these documents in relation to the research being proposed. So I'm just going to pause there for a moment or two, and I'd like you just to read that and just make some notes of some of the key words that come out of that definition. Okay, so the selection, you will be discerning, you'll be picking and choosing of available documents, ideas, information, etc., written from a particular standpoint, because every author has a positionality, to fulfill certain aims. They could be research aims, they're likely to be ideologically driven, and the effective evaluation of these documents in relation to the research being proposed. And by evaluation, we mean critical engagement with the literature, assessing its credibility, its authority, its gravitas, who it was written by, whether its claims to knowledge are defendable, whether there is an original contribution made, whether the conclusions are legitimate, whether the conclusions are overstated, understated. So it's a critical engagement with these sources that I think is really central to a high quality literature review. So what is the purpose of the literature review? Why not just begin to write on your topic without referencing any authors? Well, because a good literature review provides a clear and balanced picture of leading research in your field that you're studying, and the field of analysis for the dissertation. Clear, because if you use Google Scholar, for example, you know that most papers that tend to be on there are written very concisely, very clearly and will be of a high quality and balanced. Because if you're drawing information from different sources, and authors will have different perspectives, then you can have a measured and reflective approach to the literature that you're reading. It will also enable you to develop a coherent argument with what is known about your topic, so as that your dissertation can sit within that existing body of knowledge. And I always visualize this as a Venn diagram. I don't know if you do too, but so you have I'm drawing here on the screen, you have your original idea at the epicenter of, the diagram. And then you have the different theories and approaches that intersect with your idea, all of which will have a valuable contribution to make in terms of honing and chiseling your dissertation to a really concise piece of work. The literature review also allows progressive narrowing of your research topic, because when we begin to read, we're reading around a topic, we're maybe sort of casting the net very, very widely. But as my old geography teacher said to me when I did my O-level geography a long time ago, said, bring your background reading into the foreground. So you have your background reading, and then you marshal it and you bring it into the foreground so that it speaks really closely to your research question and your accompanying set of objectives. And, a literature review shows high levels of awareness in the professional and academic field of research that you're planning to undertake. So it's really, really critical, because it will not only contextualize your research idea, it will actually help you to refine it further, thereby enabling you to create and write a high quality undergraduate dissertation. Because the more sort of interface that you can have, the more you can show the interrelationships between sets of ideas and concepts and how they link with your primary data, the better dissertation you will produce ultimately. Okay, so planning your literature review. Now, I know that many of you, certainly my own dissertation tutees have either begun to read, and you will have begun to read around your topic. And for those of you who did research methods, either with myself or with other tutors last year, will know the importance of developing a preliminary research proposal, and that you begin to think of these key arguments and the key things that come out in your own literature review. So the first task, working with your supervisor, is to define your topic. That's number one, and you can only do that by reading around the topic initially. But when you have your research idea fixed, and you've written and you've had signed off your accompanying set of research objectives by your supervisor, you've really got a green light to begin to write your literature review with impunity, because then you know that what you're accessing is relevant, directly pertinent to your research question, and that you're not using your limited time, in a sort of wasteful manner. You're, mobilizing the time that you do have. Think about the scope of your topic. For example, if you're using a case study type approach, what are the geographical parameters of that case study? Are you looking local, regional, national, international? Are you thinking of a comparative research approach? If you're thinking about the parameters in terms of maybe you want to focus on, say, for example, gender, or you might want to focus on age, or you might want to focus on, say, a particular housing type or occupation status, or a particular aspect of conspicuous consumption, or whatever it may be. But think about the scope of your topic. And it is quite good generally in a literature review, depending on your topic, to bring in a couple of international examples by way of a flashpoint of reference. Okay, think about outcomes. So when you're reading your literature, the articles you need for your literature review, and then beginning to write, think about what are the outcomes that you want to demonstrate in a literature review. And going back to Hart's definition, what you want to be able to show is that you've undertaken a critical evaluation of robust sources that are directly relevant to your research question, and do more than just list them, as we'll see when we look at the exemplar from Wilkie and Robertson momentarily. You'll be putting them in themes, and it may help initially to just list them kind of clustered around your research objectives, because that will really help to keep you tight on message. Think about housekeeping. Now, I know you're all very experienced assignment producers, essays, reports, and a whole range of other assignments. Remember to keep your reference list, update that as you're going along, because it's nigh on impossible when push comes to shove when your dissertation, which I believe is due in early March, isn't it, this year? So think about kind of keeping all your references as you're going along. Then when the final dissertation comes in, when you've got your final draft, obviously you can go back and check that, but it's really hard to find references after the fact. So just keep that list live, everyone. Okay, so how does this all fit in with the research process? So you've all begun or will be beginning to develop your research question or your hypothesis. Now, depending on the sort of dissertation that you're doing, you could either have a hypothesis you prove, disprove, or null, the so-called deductive method of research, which is, often associated with quantitative research, is misguidedly labeled as objective. Or you may have a research question and a series of research objectives, so-called inductive research, where generally you will have overarching questions, but you, rather than having a yes, no, null hypothesis, you're letting the data speak to the question and letting the data guide you. So your synthesis of the literature, that academic body of scholarship, is crucial to your answering your research question. So if we just think of the words that are coming out on the slide that you can see here in front of you, hypotheses, overarching theses, syntheses, bringing ideas together, constructing, blending your arguments so that the best literature reviews are those that have a sense of cohesion and flow. And just to reiterate that it's much more than just a list of references, it's actually how they intersect and interlink with your research aim and your set of accompanying objectives as signed off by your dissertation supervisor. And then your developed theses, okay? So a thesis is an original set of ideas, okay? So your theses, in other assignments, your theses may manifest as a few sentences in a conclusion of an essay or at the beginning of an essay. And then your conclusion, where you're bringing together these sets of ideas and kind of, making them more than just summarizing, kind of integrating them. So that's the research process is very much like that. And your dissertation speaks to a similar process. You'll have your dissertation question, you'll read the literature, you will go out and gather data, you'll develop your theses, and you will draw all these things together at the end to produce something which I really hope, and I'm sure you will be very, very proud of. In case I forget to mention it, and I'm saying this to all my own dissertation tutees, I would really urge you, when your dissertation's finished, to get it printed and bound up to keep for the future, because we had when our dissertation submission processes all went online, which was, I think, 6 years ago now. As tutors, we felt a bit of a dearth of knowledge, and I also think, given the time that you will spend on this, spend the £10 or however much it costs you to get your dissertation bound up, and keep it, because you will look back on it with a certain degree of pride. It's the dissertation that gives you the honours part of your degree, when it is awarded to you, the BA honours, BSc honours. Okay. So thinking of your research idea, and I know you'll be refining your research focus. Some of you may even have shifted it from your research proposal last year. That's absolutely fine, very normal thing. Think of, work which you will do that hasn't been done before. Now, this doesn't have to be groundbreaking work, but it does have to be original, and it has to be a product of thought, measurement, and reflection. You will be using, going back to the quotation that research comes from existing ideas. You will be building on work that has been undertaken by other people, but building being the operative word, and using ideas but with a new interpretation, bringing things together, shedding new light on an old problem, using maybe methodologies or methods that maybe have been used elsewhere, but you want to apply them to your own study, and maybe looking at how different techniques might work. So, and it's a really exciting adventure that you have here with the dissertation, because a lot of what you'll read may well speak to other modules that you're doing. And I know that all of you will, I hope, have chosen a dissertation that you really are interested in, that you will love to do, that will pique your interest for the duration, and hopefully even afterwards. So, okay. So going back to what does a literature review, when it's done, look like? What does done look like? Well, what it will look like is you will have set out some of the key arguments of your particular research question or themes. You will become familiar with some of the vocabulary. It may be that some of the language is quite technical or esoteric, but you'll become fluent in the sort of language and terminology surrounding your ideas. You should also have been able to identify some of the seminal studies that have shaped our understanding of method and methodology. You will be able to gather together new information. Sometimes people like to express that diagrammatically, and with the exemplar that I'll show you, that gives you a really good sense of how that could be done to a very good effect. I think if you can do that, even if it doesn't end up ultimately in the dissertation, I think it's very sensible, because it'll help the creative aspect of the research process rise to the fore that much more if you can represent what you've read diagrammatically, graphically, and look at where things intersect, because the chances are you'll be choosing a range of different theories or philosophies with your own research question right at the heart of it. And that will enable you to relate ideas, research, or other empirical work, and also shine a sharp beam of light on your original contribution. So the different stages are, they're fairly straightforward. A literature review enables you to zoom in on your topic. So, go on Google Scholar, do it on the Library Gateway, do a keyword search. If you want an esoteric term, a very specific term, just put it in speech marks and see what that yields, sort by date, and so on. Look at how often the piece of literature is that you've chosen is cited, because that's normally a good, I mean, it's not, an exact science, but it's normally a good benchmark of how well received that piece of research has been. So do have a look at that. If a study's been cited, it's into double figures plus. If it's been cited more than 100 times, it's considered very influential. So zoom in on your topic, be quite disciplined about this. It's very easy in a literature review to go off on a tangent, and sometimes tangents can be quite helpful, but I think you probably need to be really disciplined to not let that happen too much, and to discard literature that doesn't speak directly to your topic. So the chances are that you'll produce multiple drafts of your literature review before you're happy with it and before you have a very good sense that it is done. You're finding intersections, you're synergizing, integrating, and you have this constant funneling of knowledge, so as that you're drilling down to those very specifics of the literature that is pertinent to your own study. The other thing just to mention before we move on to the next theme of the literature review is that often I think there's a temptation, students often think, well, okay, so my literature review is done, it's approximately 2,000 words. When it's done, is it cast in stone, or can I go back and change it? The latter is true. So if you find that when you gather your data that there are some things that come out of your data that you want to include in the literature review, by all means do. Now, that's not cheating or anything like that. It's actually what's called the completion of the hermeneutic circle, where you set out your research question, you read around the topic, you gather the data, and then you revisit the literature review. And another thing, just to make the point, which I think is another important one, which may or may not come up in future lectures for this module, is that remember in your conclusion to revisit the literature that you've cited as part of the dissertation, because I think that's probably one of the things that students don't do as well as they could from the dissertations that I've marked over the years. And the good quality dissertations, the ones that get really good marks first, are where students are assertive about going back to the literature and critiquing it for its validity in speaking to the research that they've gathered. So I'd really urge you to do that and to keep that as on your radar as prominently as possible. Okay, so I'm just going to pause here for a second, and I want you to find the paper that I uploaded on Blackboard. I'll just share this with you again, which is the Robertson paper. So if you could find that for me on Blackboard, that would be really useful. I've just got a few little exercises that I would like you to do with that paper. So if you can find that on Blackboard, I made that available last week. So this is this paper, Wilkie and Robertson, Attachment to Place, that was published in 2012 in 21st Century Geography, a reference handbook. So if you can find that for me, that would be really helpful. And I would just like you to, I'm going to just have a couple of questions that I'm going to pop into the chat feed, and I'd really warmly invite you to answer these questions, which is to do with the sort of critical nature of the article itself. So the first question is, to what extent is the writing critical? And the second question is, how well structured is this paper, do you think? Okay, so I've just popped those two questions there in the chat feed, and I would really like you just to spend 5 minutes. I'll get my timer here for you to just read that through. First thoughts on that. If anyone would like to comment based on those two questions in the Zoom feed, that would be really, really helpful. So to what extent do you think the writing in the attachment to place paper is critical? And how well do you consider the material to be structured? I've just popped a PDF there in the chat feed if you've not been able to access that, the Wilkie and Robertson paper from another source. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, so to what extent do you think the writing is critical as in analytical? Any thoughts, anyone, to just pop in the chat feed for us? Yeah, so Ruben's made a really interesting point. Thanks, Ruben. The first section of the writing isn't critical. It's only when it goes into specific sections does it get a bit more focused. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you that the first bit is rather descriptive, isn't it? Just trying to set the scene. Yeah, excellent. So as Ruben has very astutely pointed out, there's like a prelude to this paper that really begins to draw you in. Anything else? Thank you, Ruben. Anyone else? How well do you think the material was structured, guys? Candice has posted. Thank you, Candice. The material is well and clearly structured with clear sections. Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely. It's really accessible, I think, isn't it? It's really clear the sequence of arguments, the different sections, different section headings. So I think it serves that purpose very, very well. So for any of you who are thinking of, what does a good literature review look like? That's pretty much, obviously it depends on your discipline, but even those principles traverse disciplines. So that notion of, maybe you will have as Ruben has pointed out, you will have a summary section at the beginning that distills the messages down to the very essence of what appears in the literature review, to the more analytical, and as Candice has highlighted, beginning to develop a typology. And if you look at the diagrammatical way that attachment to place has been presented by the authors, I think that's very helpful. So we'll just have a quick peek at that before we carry on. So they've charted the topic through these various different sort of headings of attachment to place: childhood memories, home, formal histories, informal histories, genius loci, and so on. And then they've attempted to develop a typology, which is basically this, which they've summarized succinctly, some quite complex ideas, and then begun to map them in the way that we see here. And I would really encourage you to think graphically, everyone. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you to our two contributors to that discussion. Very, very helpful. Okay, so I hope that has helped everyone in terms of thinking what a good literature review looks like. Okay, so thinking of when you're actually behind your computer, behind your laptop, behind your PC, on your smartphone, whatever it may be, what do you need to be looking for? Okay, so When your research objectives are finalized, that's the time when you really need to be able to focus your reading. So you find a research paper on Google Scholar, a book chapter, a book, journal papers. We would be giving you a clear steer towards, prioritizing them because they're peer-reviewed and more likely to be more robust. Look at the introduction, conclusions, abstract, and summary. So just to get a sense of the sort of essence of the paper, because it might be that it's not, sufficiently well-versed to deal with your particular topic. Check the references in a journal paper, because it might be that, your research paper will focus on something specific that is unique to your dissertation, and that can help to open up other resources for you. Make notes and summarize. And the reason why that's particularly important is, of course, because reading is very passive. We don't really know if we've understood something unless we go back and test ourselves. And we're unlikely to do that if no one's there hovering to test us. So make sure, write in your own words what you understand the author to have meant, and giving yourself the license to accept that, there are various interpretations most likely that could be given to what you're reading. Keep details of all your references as you're going along, and then begin to bunch them into themes. And if it helps to stick to your research objectives, that's great. If that helps just to get you on your way, and then you can go back and you can look within, say you've got 3 or 4 research objectives, look in what themes are coming through, and you can put those into subsections. So that's a very easy way to make sure that you're not drifting too much off topic. So what is the history of the topic that you're reading? What key concepts are you identifying? What theories are being used? What methods? And you'll know that research methods means research techniques, methodologies, research techniques, and research design, ethics, literature, and all the rest of it. Are any political or moral assumptions being made within the piece that you're reading? How credible is it? What are the qualifications of the writer or writers? What kind of journal is it? Is it a high quality journal, or is it a sort of self-publication? And then think of the relative strengths and weaknesses to the articles that you're reading. So when you're reading, just to reiterate, go beyond description to evaluation and critical engagement with what you're reading. Think of how the different pieces of writing that you're reading both relate to one another, but also highlight differences, where there are counter arguments. And it's very important in a literature review to ensure that you include counter arguments and become aware of, the theories that you're being introduced to or being reintroduced to, and welcome the opportunity to have contested debates on a particular topic, because not one research process is ever perfect. So evaluation is really key. This table might be helpful. So as I mentioned, sort of bunching your reading relative to your research objectives. Give the reference in full, and you can include multiple rows here, a summary of arguments, and then that really helps to keep the debate alive and well in your own mind. Okay, so I'm just going to some concluding comments, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. Either you can turn off your mics and ask me a question, or you can pop something into the chat feed. So just some kind of concluding reflections to pull together. Start your dissertation reading as soon as. Okay. Know what done looks like. What done looks like is you've identified key arguments and critiques relative to your research question and your research objectives, with the license to go back and just add in any additional arguments that would emerge following your primary data gathering. I would really urge you to use hard copy material for articles that are particularly important for your own study. You may have your go-to articles that really help you to understand. There's been lots of research done on this, on, our ability to process stuff, online, or give yourself time to read quietly, to digest quietly. Turn off your email, turn off your phone, put your phone somewhere in a different room. Let your mind just become immersed in these ideas. Give yourself time to process them, because the best dissertations are the ones that students start early, or if you've been slightly delayed because you've amended your research topic, get that finalized with your supervisor as soon as, and then begin to read. Because as soon as you've done that, that level of anxiety that often is associated with a dissertation eases, because you're able to action certain aspects of it. Summarize articles that you're reading, identify themes, and know when to stop reading the literature. Giving yourself that little caveat that I mentioned before to go back. So, okay. I've just got a few things here on the in the chat feed, so I'm just going to look at some of the comments that people have posted. Ruben's asked, I don't know about this currently, but in first year I was told not to use very long quotes or to write in your own words with academic inference, but the paper quotes large sections to write. Ruben, that's a really good question. And I think it really depends on the context in which you're writing. For a dissertation, generally, my advice is, yes, do use verbatim quotes and obviously give the page number to protect yourself against inadvertent accusations of plagiarism, but be very discerning about those quotations and only use ones that you think are absolutely vital to your argument. Where I would use quotes, and this is where students do fall down, is if you're doing interviews or you want to include quotes from semi-structured interviews or focus group transcripts. Often students don't maximize those particular quotations anywhere near enough. And whilst 10,000 words might sound to be daunting, you will be astonished by how challenging it will be to keep your dissertation to 10,000 words, which is why in the dissertation guide, Richard has provided you with some very helpful indicative word counts for each chapter, with the literature review coming in at about 2,000. My advice there is for your first kind of full draft to have it come in at 1,800 to give yourself that headroom. But going back to Ruben's point about quotations, I think the general point is don't make them too long. And I think with that attachment to place article, because that was sort of 10, or it was a book chapter basically, the authors were a little bit, a bit free with how they used quotations. But from your point of view, when you're writing essays, keep them nice and compact. You can use the ellipses, so ... So if you get a really big quote, but not all of it is relevant, or you can lose some of it, just quote part of it, then use the ellipses ... and then give the remainder of the quote. So that's quite a good thing to do. Do make sure you get quotations from your interviewees in, and make sure, I think it's whilst if you're doing interviews and so on, you don't have to include all your interview transcripts, but I think some with the interviewee's words highlighted and maybe annotated to link back to the literature is, I think, a very good technique to use for an undergraduate dissertation. Has that answered your question, Ruben? I'll keep an eye on the chat feed for you there to see what we've got. So Elliot's asking, would you say that your objective should be centered around a particular argument? Well, that's a great question, Elliot. I think the short answer is no, because I think what you need to be doing with a literature review is exploring different perspectives. And it's quite easy and natural to be drawn towards arguments that confirm what we already know, so-called confirmation bias. So we become, as researchers, sometimes we get into a bit of an echo chamber and we only seek out literature that affirms what we already believe to be true. But we don't know what we don't know. So my advice is to read around the topic as diversely as you can, to look at the different perspectives that exist. And then in your literature review, you can cite the different perspectives. But if you fall down on one particular set of arguments or argument or typology, that's absolutely fine. But explain why you've come to that decision. Defend it. And to defend it, you may need to bring in some other writing, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense, Elliot. Get back to me if not. We'll pop another message in the chat feed there for you. Okay. Elliot's put one argument or subtopic, one objective, aware of how much my objectives are changing since I started reading. Well, yeah. And the thing is that research is not linear. It's an evolving, it can be messy, and you'll be going back and forth and back and forth. And that's okay. And it's certainly in these early days, weeks, everyone, it's important to find a way to be comfortable with that level of uncertainty until you can get it really firmed up and allow yourself to live with that sort of, well, maybe I need to be open to that idea or that. But a point comes, and in the case of your dissertations, everyone, in the not too distant future, where you'll have a clear sense, certainly, of your research aim and objectives, but you need to give yourself the headroom to be alert to new insights which will come out as a consequence of data gathering, okay? And to let the data guide you inductively, regardless of what sort of a dissertation you're doing, so as that you can go back and make the case for, research, for the originality case, for the inadequacies of the literature, and the way that the literature sort of links in to the dissertation as a coherent entity, if that makes sense. Okay, thanks, Ruben. I'm glad that makes sense. So Elliot's asked, so you're saying that a gap found in the literature review doesn't warrant an objective. A gap found in the literature review doesn't warrant an objective. Well, I think if I've understood you correctly, Elliot, and sorry, I might not have understood your question correctly, but everyone will be making an original contribution. I think if a gap found, I think if you want to be really clear about where your original contribution is, you need to draw on the literature to make that point clearly. And by doing that, you will need to draw on a range of different arguments. Does that make sense, Elliot? I'm not sure I've answered your question. All right, great. Okay, you sure? Get back to me if not. Okay. Well, listen, thank you, everyone. And it's so good to see everyone here today. I'm sorry I'm not with you on campus, but the trains have conspired against me being there today, unfortunately. I hope your journeys to and fro have been okay. I'll make this recording available to you. If anyone has any questions about the literature review, you can get back to me directly or just post them on the module Padlet. But the sooner you start, the better off you'll be. Emma's just asked me, is there a login code? And there is, Emma. I think I put it on the, it's 3181. So for those of you who arrived late, I'll just post that again in the chat feed. Okay, so the login code is 3181, which should still be valid, I think, all being well. If you've got a problem, if anyone can't log in, if that code has expired, let me know and I can retrospectively get you logged in. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along today. I hope that's been a little helpful. All the best with your dissertations. The sooner you start, the better you'll be. So just take it one, chunk at a time, and you'll definitely get there sooner than you think, probably. So every success to each and every one of you, and I look forward to marking a selection of your completed dissertations. Thank you, everyone. Drop me a line if you need, stroke, want, anything. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming along today. Take care, everyone. Bye. Bye. Hey, Holly.
Hi.
Hi, Holly. Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank
Do you
you.
want to have a quick break or anything before we get stuck into your new research idea?
I'm all right, unless you do.
No, I'm fine. I've got my trusty cup of Earl Grey tea here, so
All right, just
oh,
bear with me a second. I'll try to sort my camera out.
okay. No worries. Okay. So I think I don't know if Alex, are you there still? I don't know if Alex is just I don't know if Alex wants to have a chat or anything. Anyway, so how are you keeping, Holly?
Say again, sorry.
How are you keeping?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm glad to be back at uni and get back into it.
Get stuck in again. How's it going?
It's all right. Just give me a second.
All right,
Just
it's
trying to sort
okay.
my camera out.
Don't worry if we can't get it sorted out. It doesn't matter. I can picture you. I'll try and get my imagination sort of mobilized.